It's my pleasure to kick off the introductory meeting of the Sandy Flood Insurance Task Force. Let me start by thanking Senators Schumer, Gillibrand, my colleague Senator Booker, for working with me to address this issue as a collective team. I also want to thank Administrator Fugate for agreeing to be part of the task force, showing the willingness to write some of the challenges that we have, and Brad Kesselman, who is point man on the National Flood Insurance Program, some of the challenges that we have. So I appreciate all of the audience members who have come to see the task force at work. We've promised to be open and transparent, and so we are doing that. Finally, I want to give a special thank you and warm welcome to our non-governmental participants, Ben Rajotte, who is from the Toro Law Center, Susan Martinek from the Ocean County Long-Term Recovery Group, George Casimos from Stop FEMA Now. He's not here to stop you. That's how it started, but he's here to certainly show insights. And Denise Nyville from Breezy Point Cooperative, along with all of the other New Jerseyans who took a trip down to Washington, and some New Yorkers who are here as well. As you can see from the fact that there are so many people who have taken time from their work and families to drive down to DC in the middle of the week, the issues we face have an incredible impact on thousands of homeowners in New Jersey and New York. For many families, the difference between getting what they deserve and paid premiums for and getting lowballed is literally the difference between having a home and not. I can only imagine how frustrating this whole process has been for so many of you. And from my own personal perspective, I'll be very blunt. Your government failed you, plain and simple, and you deserve much, much better. That said, rather than rehashing what has taken place, all of the injustices of the past, talking about that, our focus today, I'd like our focus today, is how do we move forward and find solutions that will make a difference in your lives. The purpose of the task force is very simply to bring justice to the Sandy survivors who were lowballed, and to fix the claim process so that it will never happen again to anyone, anywhere. With that in mind, I'm encouraged by the recent steps that FEMA has taken to address the first goal, and I applaud the administrator for committing to reopen and review Sandy claims for all of those who believe they were lowballed. If done right, this review process has the potential to do a lot of good. If it's done wrong, it will be nothing but a pointless exercise that will only serve to waste people's time and add to their frustration. So it's critical that we get it right. It needs to be fair, and it needs to be simple and transparent. Policyholders need to have timely, unfettered access to all documents that we use to process their claim. I believe FEMA must be flexible and reasonable in what it requires in documentation from policyholders to prove additional damages, and the reviews must be objective. Policyholders must have an opportunity to appeal the decision to a neutral, independent third party so that they have the confidence that they're getting a fair shake. Nonprofits and other non-governmental organizations should hopefully have adequate resources to help policyholders file their review. All extraneous costs, rent, moving expenses, and other costs incurred by the policyholder as a result of the more than 2.5-year delay should be eligible for reimbursement and not clawed back as duplication of benefits. And the process must be timely, because every extra day that this takes is, in many cases, another day in which someone is not in their home. And once the dust settles and the review process is over, and all Sandy survivors receive what they legitimately deserve, we need to quickly pivot to the second goal of this task force, which is long-term reforms to the claim process. And I don't mean tinkering around the edges. I don't mean repackaging the same failed system. I mean looking at the whole process and reconsidering the entire paradigm. We need to examine whether or not the write your own insurance companies, or WYOs, should continue to be a part of the program at all. They take more than 30 cents of every premium dollar to service policies, and based on their performance, one thing is absolutely clear: policyholders aren't always getting their money's worth. And at the very least, any write your own insurance entity that is guilty of wrongdoing or negligent should be immediately expelled from the program so they can never harm another disaster victim again. We also have to re-examine the so-called earth movement exemption that I believe was improperly used to deny legitimate claims. I heard from many New Jerseyans, I think my colleagues in New York did the same, that they were denied because there was earth movement, except that the earth never moved until Sandy came along. And so what that exemption looks like in the future has to be talked about and fixed. And we need to fix the administrative appeal process so it's meaningful and fair, rather than a black hole that encourages more litigation by people. And if we're going to stay with the right your owns as the process, and to the administrator's credit in conversations, he was one of the ones that I'm not sure that this is the best system. We have to talk about it. So I appreciate that. We need to fix the perverse incentive if we're going to stay with the current system that gives right your owns that, in essence, there's an incentive to make sure that they don't overpay, which we applaud. We don't want anybody to be overpaid. These are all, after all, premium dollars and government dollars at work. So we want to make sure we get it right. But getting it right means no overpayment, but it also means no underpayment at the end of the day. And how do we strike that right balance? The sad truth is that policyholders are not only paying for the lawyers representing them when they've chosen a lawyer, they're paying for the ones fighting against them, and that has to stop. If we take these steps, we will have made the flood insurance program more efficient, more responsive, more reasonable for the next storm victims. We will have restored logic and fairness to the program and ended the nightmare for current storm victims. New Jerseyans that persevered through Sandy, many who are here today, are not asking for a handout. Not asking for anything they don't deserve. They did the responsible thing. They paid their insurance for years, if not decades, just in case a storm like Sandy ever made its way up the coast. And they have a right to be compensated appropriately for their losses. They deserve more from us. They deserve better, and I'm going to see to it along with my colleagues that they get what they deserve and what they are owed. And in this respect, I appreciate the senior senator from New York, who has been with us every step of the way and is forceful advocate on these issues. Senator Schumer, I'd like to recognize him, as Senator Gillibrand, Senator Booker, who's also been with me every step of the way since he came to the Senate, and we'll go from there. Senator.
Well, thank you, Bob. And first, let me thank Senator Menendez. He's been an amazing leader and done a great job with his usual intelligence, sticking to it, and really smarts about how to actually get things done. He's been a great leader, and I just want to say, I think whether you're on one side of the Hudson or the other, one side of the, I guess, Sandy Hook Inlet, I don't know if that's the place, or not, New Yorkers and New Jerseyans, thank you for that. Well, I also want to thank my other colleagues, of course. Kirsten Gillibrand and I have been partners in this effort since the horrible day when Sandy hit. And we both enjoy working with each other, and hopefully have been able to work effectively for our state. And thank Cory Booker. He's been a great addition to the team since the day he came to the Senate. Well, you know, two and a half years ago, we saw that Superstorm Sandy ravaged thousands of homes across New York. And I was there, and it was just devastating. Think of it just about every day. Being breezy, Denise was just, fires were still smoldering as the flood waters had not receded. It was just a horrible combination of fire and water. And you know, people are resilient. At the time, I'm sure homeowners thought that their toughest fight would be getting back up after the storm knocked them down. Unfortunately, we've seen over the past several months, private insurance companies, FEMA, and the agents who worked for them have caused thousands of homeowners to endure a second round of anguish, as homeowners had to fight to receive the flood insurance funds they're rightfully entitled to. Plain and simple, the way the flood insurance program worked is deeply flawed. It is too adversarial. There's too much ambiguity in how decisions are made. There's too much bureaucracy. And there's frankly too little focus on helping policyholders obtain the relief they need to overcome a disaster like Sandy. The positive news, however, Administrator Fugate and Deputy Administrator Kaiserman get it. When these problems reared their heads, we were on the phone. I was constantly on the phone with both of these gentlemen. I didn't get the usual bureaucratic stonewalling or, oh, we'll see, or, you know, this is this and this is that. They really jumped into the fore. And while we have a long way to go, the changes that they have made, and even more importantly, the changes they entertain making, will make a dramatic difference. A dramatic difference, not only for Sandy victims, but for those, God forbid, in future storms. Some of the things Administrator Fugate has done, he committed to me personally that he's going to reevaluate the entire program. This includes evaluating whether the Write Your Own insurance companies should be the ones facilitating the program on behalf of government. It also includes something I believe should happen, that some of the worst of these insurance companies that have done such bad should be out of the program. I don't think they deserve a second chance after what they did. He's also committed to reforming the program and that all options are on the table. And Brad Kaiserman has been there on the ground. He knows his stuff. And again, he's tried to push the bureaucracy along. What I'd say is, as I said, flood insurance is deeply flawed. It's like pushing a battleship, turning a battleship around. It's just sort of set in its ways. And it does some good, but not as much as it could. And Fugate and Kaiserman are trying to push the battleship. And today's hearing, we're trying to give you an extra push, gentlemen, so we can get that battleship turned around quicker and better. In addition to Administrator Fugate and Deputy Administrator Kaiserman, I want to recognize the advocates from New York and New Jersey who are here with us today. I want to thank particularly Ben Rajab from Turo Law Center. You and my staff have worked hand in glove together constantly. He's always there pointing out flaws that then we can take, no, that's what he should do. That's your job, as they say in Minnesota. And we take his advice, his facts, and bring them to FEMA. And he's been a great leader in the nonprofit community, helping so many in need. And Denise Neibel represents New York. I mean, she's part of Breezy Point. I don't know of an area that was more devastated in FEMA than Breezy. It was my old congressional district. I love the area. I ride my bike quietly on a Saturday morning through the area. Then I stop at Kennedy's. They're strong and they're relentless. And I would tell all of the folks in this audience, particularly those on the government or insurance or adjuster or lawyer side, don't mess with these folks, because sooner or later they're going to beat you. So you may as well just give in and do what they want, because they're great. So Denise, thank you, and all the people of Breezy and all the advocates in New York who've done such a great job. And I also thank the New Jersey advocates, although I know you less well than I know the New Yorkers. So what's the current state? Well, despite the incredibly hard work of our advocates, we've been let down. I've been enraged by the actions of the private insurance companies that are supposed to be working on behalf of the government, that's supposed to be working on behalf of the people. Same with the engineering firms that they hire purposefully fleece hundreds of homeowners through suspect reports. To make matters worse, these insurance companies like Wright Flood and Standard Fire had the audacity to litigate those cases in court while the federal taxpayer picked up. I've been disappointed in FEMA. As I mentioned, FEMA did not at the lower levels fail to monitor, respond, or correct these issues when they brought to their attention. They just let the battleship go forward in the wrong direction a little further. But now we're getting some help, as I said, from the top. Usually you get help from the bottom. This time we're getting help from the top of this agency. I want to say we still, though, despite the good work of Fugate and Kaiserman, we haven't seen checks cut. Pay the homeowners for the time they've spent bogged down by the bureaucratic back and forth. Who will pay the attorney's fees? Are there a duplication of benefits? The bottom line, these homeowners deserve to receive the flood insurance protection they need, and further delay in that process is unacceptable. And finally, I'd just like to talk a little bit about the non-litigant review process. We have yet to see FEMA set up the process for reviewing the claims of those homeowners who did not proceed to court. They weren't part of the lawsuit. Somehow the lawyers didn't contact them. They were equally in trouble as the people who sued. What about them? We must get answers to these questions. We're unclear how the non-litigant portion will be up and running, how it'll work. I'm pleased to hear FEMA plans to provide our offices with a proposal of how this review process will work within the next 2 weeks. But We all know this, every one of us in every walk of life here, the devil's in the details. The process must be deferential to homeowners. Homeowners must be provided with their full case file, all notes, all drafts, differing reports, compiled by the WYO and FEMA prior to beginning of their claim being reviewed. The evidentiary standard required by FEMA must be flexible. Homeowners should not be forced to provide original receipts for repairs made 2 years ago when they weren't told they needed them. And the review process has got to be trustworthy, fair, and impartial review of homeowners' claims. In March, I called for a review process to be set up for those individuals who may not have filed a lawsuit but were similarly wronged by FEMA. I'm pleased that FEMA has agreed to set up the review process, but it simply cannot be a rubber stamp of decisions that were made by FEMA in the past. As I said, I look forward to continuing to work with Administrator Fugate, Deputy Administrator Kaiserman. I know they share a vision of making this better. We will be working with you, hopefully all the time with you, but if not, we'll have to push back a little bit to make sure that these wrongs are righted. Thank you.
Senator Gillibrand, legal expertise and experience has been invaluable.
Thank you so much, Senator Menendez, and thank you to Senator Schumer and Senator Booker for their outstanding advocacy. While I am also encouraged by the progress that was finally made in federal court yesterday regarding solving the issue of 1, reimbursing homeowners for their costs to obtain settlements, and 2, a fair process to properly assess the duplication of benefits, we still obviously have a very long way to go. And what from I've seen so far, my optimism is really tempered. What happened to thousands of honest and hardworking families in New York and New Jersey after Superstorm Sandy was simply outrageous and disturbing. The fraud that was perpetrated on these families, which was allowed to fester due to lax oversight from FEMA, has been called by our constituents the storm after the storm. I am frankly still perplexed why it took so long for FEMA personnel to act after evidence of fraud was repeatedly brought to the agency's attention. But after the evidence finally did come to light in the media, the attempted cleanup of the storm after the storm to make things right has not provided me with much, if any, confidence. Here we are, 2.5 years after Superstorm Sandy, and approximately 10 weeks after settlement negotiations began, and only 1 check has been cut. 1, literally 1. And despite the fact that 7 weeks ago, Mr. Fugate and Mr. Kaiserman said to all of us that our constituents would be paid generously and quickly. That is a promise that has not been kept. How much longer do our families have to wait? How many more excuses will they have to endure? Like being told 8 weeks ago after negotiations began, when checks are literally days away from being cut, that DHS's counsel somehow overruled FEMA's authority to sign a verbal agreement presented to the court. Now, all of these families want to do is just rebuild their homes, rebuild their lives. How much more bureaucratic red tape are they going to have to put up with? I want to echo what Judge Brown said yesterday in court. He said, quote, "This is not a time for business as usual. For 2.5 years, families have waited. They have waited too long, and this committee will not allow bureaucratic obstacles to stand in the way." So here's what worries me, and this is what Senator Schumer just said. As Mr. Kaiserman said in previous meetings with us, these cases in litigation with engineering reports are the easy ones. These are the easy cases. We were told the first week of March that, quote, "we have an agreement in principle within weeks or less of cutting checks." Obviously, that did not happen. So how are we going to be able to open up this process to deal with the remaining 130,000 cases not in litigation that are much harder to solve? So my real concern about the road ahead, because I'm not convinced that FEMA's actions have matched its rhetoric, and I'm committed to ensuring we provide oversight in this process. So today's meeting is essential, And we hope we can have an opportunity to ask some very serious questions about how we'll proceed so homeowners can begin to rebuild. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Booker.
I don't really have any long opening comments. First of all, I just want to thank my fellow senators, Kirsten Gillibrand, Chuck Schumer, and especially Bob Menendez for your partnership in trying to serve our residents of our region, in particular the residents of the state of New Jersey. As has been noted before, I've been here just about a year and a half now, and have just found this whole experience stunning at the level of injury that folks have gotten after this storm. You and I have stood in countless neighborhoods with families in tears, who played by the rules, who worked hard, who did everything by the law with honest, sincere hearts, and found themselves sinking in a nightmare of quicksand, not being able to repair their homes, not being able to put their lives back together, facing financial hardship, on top of all the damage and pain they went through with Hurricane Sandy. To see this unacceptable long process after the senators were here, I was mayor at the time, championed such a successful push to get the resources available for those families, to have it be all such a torturous process with still so many neighborhoods, so many communities, so many families, and so many individuals struggling, suffering, and not yet getting justice and taken advantage of is just unacceptable to me. I am grateful to the progress we seem to be making with Administrator Fugate and Mr. Kaiserman. I've been appreciative of the breakthroughs that we've made. Some of it, frankly, has been as a result of litigation and activism based upon the incredible strength and determination of people in New Jersey and New York. And so today, I'm looking forward to beginning this task force and being consistently, as I've seen in the short time I've been in the Senate, but as was evidenced before by Senator Lautenberg and Senator Menendez, tenacious, determined, unyielding in making sure that all families, all communities see their justice that they deserve. So let's get to the hearing. I appreciate this moment to give an opening statement.
Thank you, Senator Booker. Let me invite the administrator of FEMA to make a few remarks before we hear from some of our public witnesses and then get to some Q&A.
Well, we're going to spend more time listening than we're going to talk. So that's first up. And it's not that we're being unresponsive, but I find a lot of times we're talking, we're not hearing. So we're here to listen. The very simple framework that I've been trying to accomplish, and quite honestly, I was not able to get where I wanted to be when this first came out. So we made leadership changes to do that. But to me, it's very simple. Dealing with complex issues and the fact that I can't get people back in their homes to make repairs, the arguments out there get into a lot of nuances, but it's a bottom line issue. We pay what we owe. That's what the policy is designed to do. There should be no incentive in the programs not to do that. If we think there's actually fraud, which has been some of the allegations you'll hear when people say this is why it's going to litigation, well, there's a process for that. There's inspector generals and there's justice. FEMA is not an investigatory organization. We don't have subpoena powers. We can't do investigations. If somebody thinks there's fraud, as the senator would tell you, you're supposed to be stewards of the dollar. There's a process. If we're in litigation because we agree to disagree, and that will happen in any case, does it make sense to spend policyholders' money defending cases that the settlement is less than the litigation, particularly when the cases are not clear-cut? It's oftentimes, particularly when you get this one issue, and I really want the task force to come up with some strong recommendations on the earth movement exemption, because I'm not even sure it should be an exemption. The reason it was put in there was to reduce future claims and losses in flooding, just like we have exemptions for basements. But as was demonstrated in Sandy, I've seen too many both question winds reports, but also confident engineers, that we get inconsistent answers. And if we know that in the claims process, we can't even get a consistent answer on something that you potentially could lose, if they say it's earth movement, that it's exempted in your policy, it's in the policy, we don't pay that. But we can't even get a good definition or a consistent process to determine that. Does it make sense? So we're looking at this right now for the immediate cases. If we owe money, we pay. And we found out the software that's being used had a sales tax box you're supposed to check, and it would calculate sales box. It wasn't getting checked. Well, we pay the sales tax. But then we found it was systemic, that it was a training issue. People weren't checking it. So we know that there's sales tax money. So we're operating under the ideal which Senator Menendez gave us, which was too oftentimes in government, we are more focused on not making an overpayment. We have all these regulations about improper payments, overpayments. And somehow that bled into the insurance program of putting more weight on not overpaying a claim, but not having the same protection for the person filing the claim that we pay what is owed. So part of what Brad has been working on is to deal with this in 3 tranches. The litigation we have now, let's resolve that. Let's take the same situations that we know exist in the 144,000 claims that were paid. You know, we do know that people got the maximum payouts. There's nothing really to negotiate or concern, but those people that did not get a full payout that still have unresolved issues, how do we do that? And as Senator Gillibrand says, that process from the bureaucratic side is to make sure that one thing I don't want to do is start making payments and then have, as both senators, all 4 senators tell you, last thing I want to do is have to come back and say I need money back because I didn't do it properly. I got to get it right. But that shouldn't take months or years to get to. And then we really want to go back to what was the underlying issue, because here's the thing. The flood insurance program paid eligible damages, period. It was within your policy, it was eligible, it should have been paid. The fact we're in this dispute tells us that the model of servicing policies isn't working. And as Brad can tell you, we work through 83 different write-your-own companies that all service policies with nuanced differences, yet it's our product. We actually service policies directly ourselves. And so we also are asking the task force to take a look at, with the write-your-own model, how do you continue to work through 83? How many people here had FEMA inspectors come during the disaster? And how many had to wait for the flood adjuster to show up? You know, we're paying for both of those. So we've asked a different question. Why don't we take a step back and go, why do I have to send one person out for IA and one person out for insurance? Because remember the issue you ran into? We can't make a decision on what you're eligible for individual insurance until we get the answer about your flood insurance. But because we were going through the write your own policies and they were servicing that policy, and we're like, wait a minute, it's our organization. So we're actually asking a different question. How much different is the training for somebody that serviced the policy from doing our individual inspection, because it's still looking at the same damages? And is there a way to combine it so you get one inspector, if you have flood insurance, they can make that determination. If there are eligible dollars there, that individual assistance, we don't have to wait for somebody else. So we're not there, but we're asking those kind of questions. So I wanted to throw it out to you that when we say it's wide open, we're not looking at adding another layer or just adding another box for a check. We're actually asking a different question. Since many disasters with flooding that result in presidential disasters have individual assistance, how do we do something that's more seamless, gets to the best answer the first time, pays out what's owed, does it timely within days, not weeks or months, and doesn't have to have some family go back 3 or 4 times to answer the questions or wait till you get the insurance settlement. So we want to fix this, but we want to do it in a way that makes sense, that there is equal weight for the customer servicing the policy. I mean, we talk about this from our other programs. The flood insurance program was not built around those customers as the primary focus. It was oftentimes built around the process. And we want to change that and go, it's got to be built around the people you're serving. And we need to engineer the process to be fiscally sound and correct in that, but it should be easy for us to administer and impossible for you guys to get what you're owed so you can rebuild. So that's where we're going to go from. But getting into what the recommendations are and how we get there, we want to hear from you. We want to hear from the task force. And we want you to take a look at some stuff and make some recommendations. We've got some ideas, but again, you oftentimes when you're an organization, you start trying to solve problems, you get groupthink, and you end up finding yourself defaulting back to what you were starting with, and as Senator Gillibrand does, you just tweak it, you don't really fix it. So this gives us an opportunity to say, here's what we're dealing with. You look at it, you tell us what makes sense, what would work for you, and we want to go forward.
Well, thank you, Administrator. Those are some important insights. I know we're going to have a couple of questions about that. We'll get to that point, but let me turn to, you said you wanted to listen, so we've brought some people who have personal experience on the ground, who represent others who have gone through the tragedy of Sandy. So let's hear from them. Let me start off with Sue Martin, who represents the Ocean County Long-Term Recovery Group, probably one of the most affected parts of New Jersey, not the only part, but one of the most affected parts of
The one with the roller coaster in the water. So, again, I'm Sue Martin. I'm the Executive Director of the Ocean County Long-Term Recovery Group. And I'd like to inform you up front that before taking the role as the Executive Director of the Long-Term Recovery Group, I was proudly employed by FEMA and served as a voluntary agency liaison. I feel this allows me to provide a unique perspective on several different fronts, and I certainly appreciate the opportunity to share these with you today. So on October 29th, Hurricane Sandy hits landfall on the Jersey Shore and impacts tens of thousands of houses along the East Coast, devastating our communities. Then in December of 2012, FEMA releases the primary flood maps, which is the first time homeowners realize that their recovery is more than just rebuilding their homes. Now they have to take into account the new elevation requirements. So subsequently, there seems to be, as you have all mentioned, a widespread systematic problem with underpayments to policyholders on their flood insurance claims. This leaves a homeowner with a fraction of what they thought they were going to have in order to rebuild. So we have a devastating disaster event, a major policy change, and a systematic underpayment of flood insurance claims, which when combined creates a perfect storm of challenges and hardships that have stymied the recovery for thousands of Sandy homeowners. So regarding the first two elements, we know that natural disasters are going to happen and from time to time. And the best that we can do is be prepared ourselves and prepare our communities. And then there's also going to be a need to have a continued conversation on the policies regarding the elevation requirements, just to make sure that we ensure they're implemented in a fair and safe manner. But for today's discussion, I would like to focus on the NFIP, particularly on the consequences of the low payouts. So we deal with hundreds and hundreds of homeowners each and every day, each and every week for 2.5 years. And here's some of the consequences that you need to know are due to the low payouts. People have used up their personal assets. They've used their kids' college loans. They've charged up all their credit cards. They had to take out construction loans. They had to reduce the size of their new home, losing some of their home equity. Those two top examples, those are actually the fortunate ones. Those are the ones that get back into a home. Now we get down to, now they have to apply for state grants to help them with construction. Well, this delays the recovery of a homeowner because they can't move forward without navigating that process. And because of the need for state grants, it increased the cost of projects due to meeting the grant requirements that come down from HUD that are tied to the grants. And then still, funding did not meet the entire construction gap. Many had applied to local charities for additional funding. This fund can only be spent on construction and cost of living expenses while the homeowner had to wait. And then the money could only be utilized after the insurance and the state grants allocations were determined. So even for those of us who are in the nonprofit community who wanted to give out charitable dollars, it was a quagmire because we were handcuffed in giving it out, not so to make sure that these homeowners weren't put in a duplication of benefits. So the The lack of funding stalls projects and increased the scope of work. There's a home that may have had a small amount of damage, now 2.5 years have gone by, and has certainly increased the costs that they will have to incur. Additional living expenses. This is one that I can personally attest to because the homeowners have to pay double rent and mortgage at the same time. Our nonprofit in Ocean County, I can speak for, in fact, and tell you that we have given out almost $4 million. And I would love to say that that money has all gone to the sheetrock and the hammer and the nails, but unfortunately, a majority of that funding has gone to pay rental expenses, mortgages, moving expenses. Homeowners have had to move 2, 3, 4 times. They've had to hire public adjusters to get additional funding from insurance companies. And then again, reducing the overall money available for reconstruction. Fees and fines from townships have been incurred by homeowners because their inability to make mandatory repairs. And then we get down to the health issues. We have mental and physical. And the mental, we have interpersonal, vocational, substance abuse. And then for physical, we have a load of problems. And I must say that we just had a staff member who went to the hospital yesterday and had an appendicitis. And from the hospital, he texted me to say that one of the questions that came across was he involved with Sandy? Because they're starting to show up the health effects in the hospitals, in the doctor's offices, and maybe a homeowner may not realize that it is due to the stress of Sandy, but the doctors and medical field do recognize that. So that sets up what has taken place so far. And I would just like to offer some of the solutions that we have seen. So the long-term recovery group in Ocean County was established right after the storm. And like most disasters, they were encouraged and to form a long-term recovery group under the guise of the volunteer agency liaisons for FEMA. And we were guided, we were given resources, we were connected to national partners who came in and helped us form a community group of 80 different nonprofits that are working together to make sure that we are leveraging our resources and services to the homeowner. But right now, what we see is with the NFIP situation, there's the changing the systematic problems, moving ahead, and then also kind of triaging where we are now. And although I can speak to the lack of funding and the inability to be able to repair, I have to tell you that it is imperative that whatever this process turns out to be, for this triaging, for this revisiting, it has to be done in a timely and simplified manner. Our homeowners cannot take another level of bureaucracy. Our homeowners, for every 6 months that they are out of their home, they are spending an extra $10,000 to $15,000 out of their own pocket. So what we see working right now in New Jersey to do with our state grant program is that the flaws of that were that a program was rolled out with absolutely no guidance or education. And it took us in the nonprofits a while to open up those lines of communication. But they did happen, and they happened in July. And since July till now, I can tell you that we have moved literally hundreds of cases through the navigating of the state grant program. What we would like to offer as one of the solutions moving forward is for this triaging is to make sure the nonprofits are in the mix so that we can help guide wherever the homeowners' needs are when they receive that letter from FEMA and it says to them that they have the opportunity to have their case reviewed, that we want to be there side by side with them. We want to walk the walk with them. In Ocean County, not only do we have about 24,000 FEMA verified damaged homes, we have 12,000 senior citizens. Those are the most vulnerable. They need us to remain in the mix. And I'm going to offer the idea of having NFIP clinics that would be able to give an overview of where we are now with flood insurance. That would have breakouts, sessions, or groups that would involve FEMA, would involve nonprofit builders, nonprofit lawyers, financial counselors, so we can finally try to put a holistic, complete recovery plan to get that next person home. I am truly afraid that if the nonprofits are not in the mix as advocates, pushing and helping them get through this process, that this whole exercise for today and moving forward will be for naught, because our people cannot take another heavy weight put on their shoulders. And moving forward, when we're doing our major overhauls, I would like to make a step further. And as I said, working with FEMA as a volunteer agency liaison, it is evident that FEMA recognized the value of nonprofits. They recognize the value, so much so they have a volunteer agency liaison position in a section. Why? Because they know that in the end, it is the community that is there last after a disaster, and they need to be working in unison to help form a safety net. So I think what has happened in New Jersey and with the Ocean County Long-Term Recovery Group and with the partners that we have established that we should have a seat at the table. I am not foolish enough to think that nonprofits can come in after a disaster and take care of everything. That's not what we can do. But we should be part of the solution. And when you have challenges that are so devastating, you need unique solutions. And I would like to offer up a unique solution being the trifecta. The trifecta being that you have government, you have business, and the nonprofits working together on solutions. Because the business and the government, they're not true advocates. And right now it seems as though the field is tilting, and it's tilting away from the homeowner. So I think by adding a funding stream for nonprofits after an initial disaster to each and every state, I think would be a great starting point to allow that field to become a little bit more even. And I will tell you that if we would have been in the process.
We can wrap up, Sue, so that I can say that here's some other voices. We're gonna have a conversation after these comments, but go ahead, finish your last.
I'm just gonna say, if we were in the process from the beginning with our state grant program, they would have been able to find out what wasn't working much earlier and be able to make a feedback loop and be able to make some tweaks so they didn't get so far off track.
A lot of great insights. Let me.
Yes, sir.
Joe, who is the director of the Toro Disaster Law Center. And I'm told by my staff that not everybody can, if you can bring this mic close to you so it can be heard, it's obviously a lot better for everybody.
Thank you. My name is Ben Rajat. I'm the faculty director of the Disaster Relief Clinic at Toro Law Center on Long Island. As a point of background about Toro's disaster law program, Toro started its program 3 days after the storm with the Sandy Hotline that was formed through the vision of our dean, Patty Salkin, and with generous grant support, including from organizations like Robin Hood, United Way, Long Island Community Foundation, and many others. The hotline ultimately grew into a comprehensive disaster law and policy program at the law school, consisting mainly of 3 parts. First is the Disaster Relief Clinic, which assists households directly, while at the same time explore two of whom are here today, and Vika Raghunandan and Vicky Steiner in the audience as well. Through our public advocacy center led by Tom Belicka, who's also here, which advises the clinic and provides overall coordination and outreach and collaboration with the greater nonprofit community and public. And third, through our Land Use and Sustainable Development Law Institute, which is led by Professor Sarah Adams Shane, and works to promote resilient land use planning. At the clinic, intake levels to date, including both the clinic and the hotline, are approaching 2,000 households since starting 3 days after the storm. For a long period of time, flood insurance was our most significant segment of need, particularly as we approached the 1-year anniversary of the storm, and for some period of months beforehand and afterwards. And just as an example, in the months leading up to the 1-year anniversary, we'd maybe get 10, 15 calls on average per week. As we approached the 1-year anniversary, there were some days when we got 10 to 15 calls per day. And we commend FEMA for extending the default proof of loss deadline, which helped provide a lot of breathing room for those households who have called us. We have seen virtually every way that a claim can go wrong. We have seen claims that have worked out well, but generally those folks don't contact us. We have seen how the process in any given program can break down. Our public interest mission is to assist Sandy-affected households, and our educational mission at the same time is to train the next generation of leaders. Let me just provide a brief overview of what we have seen. When the clinic started taking intakes, I started nearly 3 months to the day that Sandy had made landfall. I previously was teaching doctrinally. My areas of focus have been administrative law, environmental subjects, and legal process. And so when I came in, one of the things that struck me is often seniors would come to the clinic looking for help in the flood insurance process. This is 3 or more months afterwards. They would lay pictures of their devastated home on a conference table, and they would just start to cry. In them, I saw my parents and the Cape home that they had bought in Connecticut after I was born, which resembled so many of the homes that were destroyed. In their feelings of powerlessness, I saw the critical role of nonprofits committed to the public interest. In the breakdowns of the recovery process, I see the goals of recovery and resiliency being at times artificially put into tension. In Sandy, I see we're glimpsing into the future. I see my daughter, and that now is our opportunity to get it right when solutions can do the most good. We have found elderly individuals and persons with disabilities living in mold-infested homes months, years after Sandy, or living in otherwise unsafe structures. We have seen, going on 2 years after Sandy, asbestos siding dangling off flood-damaged properties. We represent a Sandy survivor with meticulously organized paperwork kept neatly inside a box, which is so travel-worn from being carted around to every place that he's been directed and redirected again, that the box has become more duct tape than cardboard. In part because housing costs are already so high on Long Island and throughout much of the Sandy-affected region in both states. We have seen working families with a mortgage and outstanding Sandy losses that amount to significantly more than $500,000, and often more than that, for small homes. And it's hard to imagine how these households can be expected to pay that down while also preparing for their retirement and educating their children. The overwhelming majority of our clients never had a flood loss before Sandy, or in some cases, Hurricane Irene. Like millions of other Americans, their communities were often planned and built long before the risks, climate change, and coastal flooding were identified, assessed, or regulated through things such as zoning codes and other land use controls. As a nonprofit legal services provider and an educational institution, we've come to believe that it's hard to conceive of terms like resilience, fairness, and sustainability as concepts at a macro level without some grounding in the lives and the communities that they touch. especially while we continue to see so many families that have lost their financial footing and well-being, and at the same time, I'd say up until now, have felt disempowered to attain. This is why we commend the senators from New York and New Jersey and their staffs for forming this task force and for their oversight from the start over this process and the recovery. This is why we commend FEMA and Administrator Fugate for reopening the claims process to anyone who feels that they were underpaid. We are cognizant of the fact that FEMA's survivor-centric emergency planning and response brought by Administrator Fugate has saved lives in New York and New Jersey and other parts of the Sandy-affected region. We have met with Deputy Administrator Brad Kaiserman and his team as part of a nonprofit working group of which we are part in order to provide input. And while the input has generally been at a general level, we see that the agency is reaching out to build capacity, and we know Mr. Kaiserman and his team as people of integrity. It's in this spirit that we have embarked on this task force. If I just could provide some overall suggestions.
Yeah, and we want to hear those, and to our next two presenters, to the extent so we can get some questions with the administrator, if you particularly have insights that can help us in terms of where things went wrong, how you believe they can go better, those are very helpful to us.
Thank you. So the hallmarks of most of our suggestions, and we have been working on developing a very detailed list, but the hallmarks of most of them revolve around ensuring sufficient oversight and integrity to the claims review process, including three things, among others. Its overall structure, standard setting, and how individual adjudications will take place, as well as the need for an independent, impartial appeal process, both at the adjudication level and at the appeal level, to ensure adequate due process. Furthermore, to echo Sue Martichek's statements, the essential ongoing need for nonprofits and community groups and the ongoing need related to that for nonprofit funding to assist in this aspect of recovery is important. In order for this process to work, they need to be part of it, and this requires both capacity and longevity. We have additional specific suggestions, which I'd be happy to elaborate on as the topics continue and time permitting, but the very premise of most of our suggestions that we're developing is that no one nonprofit advocate or group can speak for the community, and this large universe of policyholders bid process benefits from inclusion, participation, and transparency. Thank you.
Thank you. Turn to George Casimos, who is the founder of FEMA Now, which is a citizens group that started being engaged in New Jersey very large and went beyond to deal with the realities of the aftermath of Sandy.
Thank you, Senator Menendez, for
Just
that.
like the microphone and put it really close.
Thank you, Senator Menendez, for that kind introduction and warm welcome. First thing is, I'm going to make this short and sweet. My name is George Casimos. I'm the founder of a grassroots organization called Stop FEMA Now. I started this organization right after Superstorm Sandy to figure this whole thing out, basically. At the time, we were fighting the ABFEs. It was a problem, and we kind of fixed that. Since then, we've worked with Senator Menendez to stop the skyrocketing flood insurance rates, with Senator Menendez sponsoring and passing the Homeowners Flood Insurance Affordability Act. And now we're working on the claims process. While our name, you might think we're a little bit crazy, but we're not here to fight FEMA. We're here to work with FEMA. We need FEMA to help us recover. And number one, we appreciate the swift action you've done with bringing in Mr. Kaiserman to help with the NFIP changes. We need FEMA to run an affordable flood insurance program. And we need FEMA to fix the mistakes of the past. We have to work together. We've heard from thousands of people who've had their world flipped upside down because of all the issues that are happening. And sit here and scream and yell, we're not about that. We're here for the voiceless, for the people who can't get their voice out. And I just want to tell you about two people. I want to tell you about, he's a Marine. His name is Doug Quinn. He's a single dad, and he's trying to raise his daughter through her high school years, and he's living like a vagabond. I just want, Doug, please raise your hand, who you are. For almost 3 years now, his daughter has not lived in their own home, going through high school. That's what we do as Americans. We want to raise our children and do a better thing. And I will give you one other young lady. She has a disabled child. She's a senior citizen. She lost her home, and her name is Maria Carbone. Please raise your hand. And, you know, I don't know. She didn't file a lawsuit. So I don't know how we're going to make that person whole, but we have to figure this out or make her as whole as possible. Let me make this clear. I'm not a Democrat, Republican, and I've never been an advocate. This is all about fairness and getting people back in their home. This process must be simple and straightforward. We cannot make this another REM or New York Rising program. The people do not have the stomach. We have to make it simple. Nobody wants to go to another FEMA meeting. They would like to go and see Denise or Sue or Ben and let us come. They know us. They can't go through another process. They can't go through their garbage bags to pull out a receipt. Okay, we can help them. If you truly want to help them, you have to let us get the word out to the members and say, hey, come on, guys, we can help you. They're trying to change it around, and we'll help, and we'll get that word out. Most Sandy victims are not lawyers. Let us help you help them. There needs to be an independent auditor or somebody outside the whole area. We feel you're doing the right way, and you've changed that ship. Just give us somebody independent, and we'll feel a little bit better on that. We're losing our faith in government, and hopefully we can get that faith back, and hopefully you guys can help us get it back. We truly are. We are the middle class, and we just want what we paid for. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Denise Nybo, who is the Assistant General Manager of Breezy Point Cooperative.
Thank you. My name is Denise Nebel, and I am the Assistant General Manager and a Corporate Officer of the Breezy Point Cooperative, a small community in Southern Queens. I'm a single mother with 2 teenage children for who I am responsible. At work, my responsibilities are focused on shareholder services, corporate communication, and governmental relations. On October 29th, 2012, my responsibilities expanded to assisting in the rebuilding of my community. Superstorm Sandy was devastating to Breezy Point, as it was to the many neighborhoods in the Rockaways, Broad Channel, Howard Beach, Hamilton Beach, Garrettson Beach, and other communities surrounding Jamaica Bay. While many folks were not familiar with Breezy Point, we became worldwide news after the subsequent fires and destruction that occurred. 135 homes were burnt down, and over 200 homes were completely wiped away by the storm surge, wave action, and flooding. Every home in the community of over 2,800 families was affected. Breezy Point is a hard-working middle-class community. We are police officers, teachers, firefighters, and nurses. We are a generational community where families live side by side and homes are passed down. We are a community deeply rooted in service to our country and service to those who are in need and less fortunate. We are also a community that has embraced the traditional American way of life. Work hard, raise your family to honor God and country, educate your children, pay taxes, and take care of those that need assistance. Never did any of us believe that we would be faced with losing our homes, depleting our savings, and in many cases, having to start over. Let me share with you my story, and keep in mind, I am one of the lucky ones. My primary residence on Jamaica Bay was inundated by storm surge. My home was flooded from water that came up through the basement into my first floor, as well as from the exterior. The force of the water destroyed and propelled debris into my home. The entire first floor was destroyed. Gone were things money could replace, and gone were things that money could not. But I was one of the lucky ones. I had flood insurance. I called my insurance carriers. I contacted FEMA, and so began my battle. I was initially denied housing and other benefits from FEMA because I had flood insurance. Both flood and homeowner insurance carriers initially stated the other was responsible for my claim. I found myself in the middle of that battle, and neither would provide housing assistance. After appeal to FEMA, I received my housing assistance of $3,790. Remember, I'm one of the lucky ones. After 8 days in a motel, I moved my 2 children and dog to an apartment in Brooklyn while my home was restored and repaired. I went back and forth with insurance adjusters. I made phone calls every single day, fighting and writing emails. It was constant and it was exhausting, frustrating and disheartening. Everything was a negotiation. Not exactly what I had expected. See, I purchased flood insurance and paid my premium in full and on time. Here's what I didn't expect. When the dust settled and all was said and done, I had to take a 401k loan and refinance my mortgage to cover over $59,000 in repairs and restoration not covered by insurance. I had to personally cover $14,300 in housing costs, also not covered by insurance, and I had to pay the bank $1,763 for my car that insurance wouldn't cover when it was declared a total loss. But 8 months after Sandy, I was able to move my family back home. Remember, I am one of the lucky ones. Many of my neighbors and community members are still struggling. They are caught up in litigation in order to collect proceeds from insurance that won't cover their losses or have paid them a very small fraction versus their actual costs, or nothing at all. Some are caught in the bureaucracy of policies that frankly seem ridiculous. One family was told their house is worth less than the policy limit. The premiums for their homes for years were collected at the stated value. Yet now that the house has been destroyed, it is worth less. And the kicker is the city ordered the demolition of the home. The Army Corps of Engineers also did. It was demolished, and FEMA said they should not have allowed that to happen. Many homeowners were in a cycle of despair regarding paperwork. Providing paperwork such as proof of ownership when the contents of their home was destroyed became difficult, and attitudes were, if you can't produce, we can't help. Some victims submitted paperwork multiple times to find that the documents never made it to their case file and had to be submitted yet again. And as neighbors and families conversed with each other, what they found were inconsistencies in how things were handled and paid out. Many are litigating or continue to fight with their carriers. Others have given up and covered expenses on their own with their 401ks, retirement funds, children's education funds, and life savings. They are exhausted, desperate, and simply want to bring their families back home. Some will never be able to return. When I had the opportunity to escort Mayor de Blasio around Breezy after Sandy, I expressed to him that an extraordinary event requires an extraordinary response. And we must find a way to eliminate the status quo, bureaucratic response, and put extraordinary efforts in place to help people. And there are a great many people who still need help. I wish to thank Senator Schumer, Senator Gillibrand, Senator Menendez, and Senator Booker for their continued advocacy and support and convening this task force. I wish to thank Administrator Fugate and Deputy Administrator Kaiserman for their participation and support in striving to improve the current process and initiate reforms. I would also like to thank my fellow task force panelists for their efforts on behalf of all the families and victims of Sandy. Your advocacy is deeply appreciated by many. We must all strive to make things better for those still struggling and for the victims of the next event.
Thank you. Well, I think you all have had some very powerful and moving stories, as well as some very pointed insights. So let me kick it off with Administrator Brugate, and also invite him to, if he wants to join. We were encouraged back in early March when FEMA made a commitment to open up the opportunity for a new review to ensure people get what they're entitled to and not have to litigate in court. Some people chose to do that. I know you're working on that. But we felt that people shouldn't have to litigate in order to have a fair and honest review. Now, it's been nearly 2 months since that commitment was made. And so can you give us an update of where we're at about that process? And can you talk to some of the elements that various task force members have mentioned, like it needs to be fair and simple, that it needs to have timely, unfettered access to the documents that were used to process their claims, so that people don't have to go through this all over again? That will you be flexible and reasonable in terms of the documentation from policyholders? Will they have an opportunity to appeal to their decision to a neutral, independent third party so that they can have confidence that they're getting a fair shake and not that we're just going through the motions, which I know is not your intention, but people, need to have a real sense of confidence that if they're not satisfied, they can go to an independent party. Will you include, and we heard this is a compelling statement by just about all of the non-governmental task force members, will you have a role for the nonprofits to be able to work to help people get that? So those are some of the, the overarching things, and I invite whoever one of you wants to begin to address that, because that's the immediate question. There are longer term questions, and you mentioned it, Administrator, but let's start there because there's a lot of people still hurting and waiting, and we don't want to wait for the next storm.
I'll let Brad go into details, but the way we're starting this is we're going to take our first contacts, because we got 144,000 claims that were serviced. We've got to start somewhere. And if we just say call us or reach out to us, we're going to probably get a rush and not get to the ones that we want to kind of do a triage. We want to start with the ones where we know we had certain engineering firms that in litigation had a lot of history of not providing accurate information. We know who that engineering firm serviced, so we know which policies. So we want to make that call first. We want to go where we knew we had engineering firms that we were dealing with litigation that also had claims that were not litigated. We want to make those contacts first because we know that was something very specific. And because Brad's been working on that, a lot of times his staff already have what you're saying. You want to simplify the process. We already know what we need to get the answer on that. So we just went through the litigation. So that gives us the first tranche we want to start with. Then we want to go to anybody that had an engineering firm review, because that's been systemically one of the chief issues. And then we don't want to preclude anybody else. So then we'd open up to all the other claims that did not get the full policy service. Our thought is if people already got the $250,000 maximum, there's not much to discuss. And that, again, I think that gives us our top end. So we're going to do it in phases. And the reason we want to do that is we know that with certain engineering firms, because of litigation, we're not going to have to do as much work to get to that because we're already doing that in the litigation cases. And I think in working with the plaintiff attorney, Brad's established how much documentation do we need to get to the right answer. But Brad's also, his team's been building this out because the other thing is we don't want it to take months to start. We don't want it to take years to resolve. We don't want it to take 6 months to resolve. But the other thing is that the volunteer groups, if we know what information we need to get the right answer and you can help us get the information, we want to facilitate that and say, okay, when we start the process, this is what we need to find. Because at some point the bureaucracy will kick in and I got to have a piece of paper, some documentation that says, why did you change your decision that I can defend? And I don't need to have as much information as we probably did before, but I need to have something that says, okay, why did you increase this payment? Why did you do it? And we want to set the bar low enough that it's not egregious, but at the same time, it's defensible. I don't want people coming in and saying, well, you overpaid people now. You went to the other extreme. So we want to do that to kind of set those boundaries. I want Brad to really go into details because the timing of this and getting started, and again, as Senator Gillibrand said, we wrote one check. Everything we've been talking about is the process. As I've told everybody, the only thing I care about is, has the check been written? That's the only measure that counts. And so everything's driven by the outcome of, has the check been written? If the check has not been written, we're still talking process. Brad?
Thank you, sir. Senators, thanks for having us here today, and colleagues, I appreciate very much your remarks. Let me ask you a question before I get into the details. How many of you are Sandy survivors? So just keep your hands up for 1 second. How many of you would prefer not to go through the process you went through to get the disaster assistance you got so far? How many would prefer not to go through that again? Most of the people left their hands up. Okay, put your hands up. I got to tell you something. One of my last jobs, my job was to coordinate the government's response to the piracy of the Maersk, Alabama. Remember that a couple years ago when the Somali pirates took the Maersk, Alabama? Let me just tell you how much easier it was to coordinate 50 federal agencies and several foreign governments to kill 3 pirates and bring 1 back for trial. That was way easier than this, and I'm not saying that as a joke. Senator Gillibrand is correct. My actions, not the agencies, my actions have not matched rhetoric to date, and here's the reason why. Every turn I take, what I see is one more piece of process that's going to aggravate you, that's going to frustrate you. Maria, by the way, I will need to get your name and information. So could you do that, please? Thank you. So my assistant will get your information. And sir, we've already exchanged emails, so I'm going to make sure that we've done that. You're just going to be frustrated if we roll out one more bad process. You are. You're not going to like it. And somebody said it earlier, I think it was you, George. It's better to, somebody once told me, you can do it good, you can do it fast, or you can do it cheap. Pick 2. You can never do all 3. So I would like to do this in a way that is cost effective for the government so that the money goes to the policyholders, not the government process. I would like to do it in a way that's very, very good. And unfortunately, it's taken us more time than I had hoped to get there given the obstacles. But here's the commitment I'll make to you, Senator. We will brief your staffs next week on the proposal. We'll make sure you have adequate time to consider how we're going to move forward. Jason, we'll do that. So we will brief you next week. We'll make sure there's time. I think that Ben will tell you that we will brief you on the process that we want to use to open up the claims review. So we are calling it the Sandy Claims Review. That's what we're going to call it. We will brief the senators and their staffs and the congressional staffs on the process. We want to make sure that you have some time to think about that. And then I want to be able to, by May, send out the first letters. Let me give you an overview of how I envision this will work. All of this is subject to some change because I want to hear from the congressional staffs. I want to hear from the advocacy groups. We've met with the advocacy groups, and the commitment was that we would get back and talk about how we want to see it go forward. And not just as a one-time shot, but as Ben and Sue know, I'm looking for exactly what you asked for. I do not see this process working without the engagement of the advocacy groups and that team, the nonprofits, continuing to do what they've been doing, because it will not work. And you're absolutely right, George. You all need to be involved in the process. If you can't be the proxies out there saying, bring it in, and you have some ability to advocate on the behalf of the policyholders, it's not going to work. It didn't work before. So we've already enlisted that aid. We're having those conversations, and more than that, we're putting the transactional, we're putting the money where it needs to go to make that happen, and the vehicles to do that. It's not that easy, to be honest with you. So this is an extraordinary situation, Denise, and you know what? Government didn't always consider how to do things for extraordinary situations. The administrator tells me all the time, and reminds me that I fail at it frequently, plan for the catastrophic, because if you plan for the catastrophic, then you can deal with everything less than that. And so we are dealing with administrative situations here and laws and regulations that never intended to deal with a situation of this magnitude. I expect that we are going to direct mail in tranches, meaning so we're going to take small groups by zip code. We're going to direct mail all the Sandy survivors who are not in litigation and didn't have policy limits. Because if you had policy limits, honestly, folks, there's nothing I can do for you. I don't have any money above policy limits.
but they're not in their home. So
Ah,
how
so-
are you going to direct mail if they're not in their home?
So here's the answer.
I'm not trying to be.
No, it's a great question. So there's a number of ways we're gonna have to work this. So first of all is we do direct mail, and the first thing that happens is the letter comes back returned, not here. And then that generates a list for us of people we have to find. Who will know where they are? The advocate groups may know where they are, so we can reach out to the advocate groups because they may be clients. The other way is there are actually services that we subscribe to, Reuters has one, others do, that allow us to find people who have relocated or moved. It's not gonna get us 100%, but my experience working this on the individual assistance side is it'll get you 85 or 90% of those people. But the first thing we have to do is get that letter out, have it returned back that says address C not there, and then we have a list to work with. The other thing is media. So we will do work with the media. We'll work with New York Newsday. We'll work with other media outlets to make sure that we can push information out so that people who want to raise their hand and say, hey, you missed me, I want to come in, I want to do this. So that's how we'll answer that. Okay. And by the way, you can, all the centers, okay, you can stop me for questions as we go.
Well, let me let you go through it all, and then
Sure.
I want to turn to Senator Gillibrand.
Absolutely. So what I envision is letters going out in tranches. We will begin with the suspect engineering claims, and the reason for that is, frankly, we've got information and data on that that allow us to move swiftly through that group. It also allows us to manage the flow of responses back. My plan is that you will be in touch with a single caseworker on the FEMA side, and they will stay with you for the entire part of the process unless you object. And then we'll transfer you to somebody else who you can work with. You've asked to make sure there's going to be neutrals involved. There will be neutrals involved in the process, and there will be a neutral decision maker. If you do not like the answer that you got through the process, there will be a neutral. You'll be apprised of that. We're still working on who the neutral will be or what entity that will be. And look, folks, these are federal dollars. This is not a court hearing. In the end, I have to decide what money goes out the door. I am accountable. But I will be extraordinarily deferential to a neutral, and I have committed to the nonprofit groups that I will work with them on the standard of review, and we will be transparent about it, and we will publish on the website so everybody can see how many times I've disagreed with the neutral. That means I'll have to see how many times I've disagreed with the neutral, and you know what that means. So that's going to stimulate some accountability there. You talked about evidence required by FEMA. You heard Craig. I've got to have some evidence, but we are 3 years past the event. We are completely understand, and we have been very well informed by Sue and George and Ben and Melissa and others in the process about what's realistic in execution, and that is the key here. Whatever we do, we have to be realistic in execution. And 3 years after the event, realistic execution probably doesn't look like detailed contractor estimates. That said, the IG is going to be right behind us. In fact, I've invited them to sit in the process so they can watch the whole thing and give us any comments as we go. Because I don't need any Monday morning quarterbacking on this. So we'll invite the IG to sit in with us. So we're going to look at what the minimum level of documentation is, reasonable in execution, and I will rely if necessary on affidavits or other documentation. But again, remember, when you sign under penalty of perjury, you're signing under penalty of perjury. So I expect integrity on both sides of this, and I know that I can get that from the citizens of New York, New Jersey, and Eastern Seaboard. By the way, Denise, I used to go to Breezy, and Senator, I went to Kennedy's, the Smith family, Desi and Kay Smith, who lived on Breezy until they passed. More like my second parents. So I'm very, yes, sir.
Let me turn, we have time constraints with some of our colleagues. Senator Schumer?
Yeah, I have some questions. Again, I thank you. The reason I said your comprehensive and thorough and non-ducking it explanations or explications of what you're going to do is why I have some faith in you guys. We're gonna watch you like a hawk.
Yes, sir.
We have trust but verify, but we have we think you're doing a good job. Okay, first question. I'll try to go through these quickly because I know my colleagues and I both have other appointments. This is on earth movement. This is to the administrator. I agree with you on the earth movement issue. I've seen too many cases in which homeowners have had their claims denied based on this exact issue. You mentioned that maybe we should get rid of it. Well, let's say that. Can we say that now? Would you be willing to at least admit to no longer fighting the cases in court, which are based on the earth movement dispute?
I think I'll let Brad talk about the cases we're actually litigating and what we're doing to get to resolve it. I'm really looking at this going forward, and it would have to be a calculation of what it means to the fund, because this was originally put in there to reduce future payments in disaster. So if we take this out, it's going to increase the potential payout from the fund. But I think that gets offset by the litigation engineering. I'm not sure how much difference it would be if we got rid of it. But this goes back to the whole structure of the flood insurance program. And what we have built in these exemptions, trying to control costs, that have actually boomeranged and actually cost the taxpayer more money, the policyholder more money, because almost my experience with this is probably the hardest thing for us to adjudicate and get right.
In all due respect, Mr. Administrator, this is not just a cost issue, it's a fairness issue. These people were screwed because of this earth movement stuff, and we ought to change it even if it costs a little more. And I would ask you to also open the cases, reevaluate cases that were denied claim based on earth movement. Once you make this decision, which I hope you'll make the right way, open up the old cases. There aren't that many of them.
Well, again, I think Brad can speak to this.
How many of them
what
are
the
there?
litigation is about.
Senator, I don't know exactly how many there are, and here's how I'm handling it in litigation. If most of the cases that come up in litigation that involve earth movement are with a suspect engineering report finding causation, and as you know, the way I've approached this is we are discounting the suspect engineering report, so we are going with the reports that we get from the plaintiffs. That means that the policyholder who hired an engineer or a licensed adjuster or a licensed architect, we are deferring to that report. We're going to have to, and I'm not going to give you a bureaucratic answer. The costs involved in walking away from the earth movement are so significant that they would change policy rates dramatically across the fund. But I'm not clear at this stage of the game whether any, it's like, I'm trying to find an analogy. But I can tell you, you get two engineers and they'll look at the same house and they give you two different answers. And we got to figure out the true points.
I'm going to try a little quickly because I know my colleague has to go. Sometimes she has to watch out for the kids too. Okay, that's still 5. I know she has to come up with stuff. I'm used to that. It's great that she does both. Decisions on the non-litigant review process. I was very glad to hear that we're going to have, Brad, a neutral, as you call.
Yes, sir.
That means an independent arbitrator? It means someone not from FEMA? You can't say, oh, they're from another division.
Absolutely, and I've specified that the person who, or the organization that does this can have had no prior contact in FEMA that we can't discount.
So it's a true independent arbitrator.
That's the goal, true independent.
Okay, and that's very good. What about, and that's good stuff we care about. That's good. What about a secondary review if they disagree with the initial decision? What happens with is the independent arbitrator's decision going to be final, or is there some review on procedural or other?
The independent arbitrator will, as I envision this, will make a decision based on a standard review that I will coordinate, particularly with Professor Rajat, and that decision will have to come to me, and I will have to. The way I'm framing it is, I'll have veto authority. The default will be it's accepted unless there's appropriate cause. I will accept it.
I want to go to the duplication of benefits issue. I'm trying to.
Yes, Senator. Go ahead.
You know, there are people who've waited for years to receive flood insurance payments. Now they're being asked to pay a portion of these back because they were deemed a duplication. So many homeowners suffered the loss. I hate it when I hear these people having to come to me and say, we suffered. We didn't even get enough money to cover all our damages, and now we got to pay back. Can you commit to not seeking a clawback of any settlement as an amount of duplication of benefits? It's really cruel.
Senator, the administrator has authorized me to determine that there is no duplication of benefits for the FEMA Individual Assistance Program as a result of any payout in this program. That said, everybody needs to understand if you took CDBG money from New York Rising or Build It Back or New Jersey REM, that's going to be subject to a duplication of benefits analysis. I have no control over that, and those folks.
But FEMA will not claw back.
FEMA will not, sir. He's
good. Great. Okay, next, rushing through these nonprofits. Now, I called the administrator a week or two ago because we have our archdiocese, our Catholic Charities, is a great. They seem to do what your little Ocean County group does. Big. All right. Big, gigantic. Now you're breaking comedy. Okay, got it. You're wonderful. Ocean County Task Force does. We have the little Archdiocese of New York. Okay, how's that? Now we're equal. If you can be equal to them, you're pretty good because they do. Catholic Charities does a great job in New York. So they need money. And I would just like to ask, will we be a little more lenient in funding these nonprofits? Because you go to homeowners, they're average folks. They have a job. They have a family. The insurance company tells them one thing. FEMA tells them another thing. State tells them a third thing. They don't even know how to duplicate it up, and they say it's on your back to get everybody together. And what our arbitrators, what our independent and our nonprofits do is they have someone who pulls it all together and can come up with a package drives these poor people nuts.
I'm
Can
trying.
we try to make sure that nonprofits like Rajat, like Martachek, the powerful, large, strong organization she heads, like the Archdiocese, get the money they need? It's bang for the buck.
I
It's a
agree.
small amount of money for a huge amount of good.
We agree. I am trying, but it goes back to this is one of those situations where the law doesn't contemplate the extraordinary. I'm trying to have options in time for the briefing.
Well, if you need help from us on that,
I will let you know.
I would like to be able to offer.
I will let you know by Monday, sir.
Go ahead.
I asked one question, so, Senator Gillibrand.
Thank you. What I'm really upset about in this whole issue is the fraud. The amount of fraud, the level of fraud. These are crimes. Crimes against New Yorkers and people who live in New Jersey. It's outrageous. And what I'm not seeing, and what I'm most angry about, is there's no accountability for the fraud. I'm furious that we still have money going to these fraudulent organizations. And so last meeting, we talked a lot about this, and I want to know where we are. Have all payments to WYOs involved in litigation and the 3 engineering companies who may have committed fraud ended? Are we still paying these people? Taxpayer dollars.
Senator, I am no longer allowing any funding to go to any of the engineering companies that have been accused of the suspected fraud.
Thank you. Second issue, it's estimated that for these WIOs, they're going to be asking for legal fees to be reimbursed by the federal government up to $100 million. I am of the belief that American taxpayer money should not be paying these legal fees to commit fraud. And in early March, I asked you about the potential of recouping some of these fees, and you said you would get a legal opinion in the next month or so. Have you received that opinion, and what does it say?
So I have not received a legal opinion, but I do have an answer for you. So a couple pieces to it. So one, I want to be very clear on this, and I'm sorry, and I'm probably not going to win me any friends here today. There's no evidence that's been produced yet that I have seen that any insurance company has committed fraud. I have seen evidence that deeply concerns me about what engineering firms have done, and I have referred that to the Inspector General. The Attorneys General of New York and New Jersey are doing criminal investigations in which we are fully cooperating. But I think it's very critical right now, and we need to be very careful about the language here. There are courts of law, and their job is to determine facts in law, and they are doing their jobs. I am trying to settle cases because settling cases will save the government money and save you money and save your premiums and your fees that are being used to pay for those defense lawyers. But we do have a contractual arrangement with your insurance companies to make sure that you get paid.
Mr. Kaiser,
Yes, ma'am.
I see evidence of fraud. I see the fact that these insurance companies, out of a matter of case, paid 14 hours for every engineering report. You cannot say to me that every engineering report took 14 hours, no matter what, and keep paying that amount. That was the practice of these insurance companies. So I do hope that there's far more investigation going on than an assumption that they were not party to this fraud.
Senator, I'm not making any assumptions about who was party to anything. I am going to wait the investigative facts, and I promise you that I will take appropriate action when the facts have been found by competent investigative authorities. I am not a competent investigator. My job is to try to get your money, and apparently I'm not all that competent at that either.
So
I'm going to try.
Let me finish. Let's be quick. So have the bad actors that you are now aware of been debarred from getting further federal benefits and federal contracts? Have High Rise and U.S. Forensics been debarred from doing business with the insurance, with the flood insurance program? And if not, do you believe that this is forthcoming?
We have prepared packages for suspension and debarment for any engineering firm on which there is fraud allegations. We have been asked by the criminal investigators at the state and federal level not to proceed until they have completed their investigations, and I am cooperating with those investigators.
And my last concern is that one person has been fired from FEMA. So I would like you to look long and hard to make sure none of the people who worked at FEMA were so blind to something that was committed so vastly with so much money at stake and our homeowners. I'm very disturbed that not one person's been fired. So I would like a fuller review.
Senator,
Let me just, I let it go for a while, but I couldn't have, when we conduct hearings here, which this is a quasi hearing, we invite the public to hear what's going on, but we don't take expressions of support or opposition to whatever is being said. So if you can just, I understand the emotions and the challenges, so I've been lenient, but in fairness to everybody, if we can just hold off on that for now. If you want to answer those.
I am absolutely concerned about who knew what at FEMA. I've asked the Inspector General to investigate. They have commenced their investigation. I have reassigned several individuals for whom I have concern about their performance in the conduct of the program. As you know, one associate administrator and one deputy associate administrator have either retired or resigned in the aftermath of this. And I will hold anyone accountable once I have the evidence from the Inspector General. I feel that part of fairness and integrity is being fair to people who work for us and giving them an opportunity to have a proper investigation one way or the other. But they will be held accountable based on the evidence we receive, Senator.
Thank you for your responsiveness.
Senator Booker.
Senator Menendez, if it's okay first, I just want to see if George, you're trying to break in to see if I can answer your question.
Thank you, Senator Booker. Number one, Senator Gillibrand, your Stop FEMA Now membership is in the mail. I want to thank you very much.
And Kirsten, Chuck does not get honorary New Jersey status, however you do.
Somebody has to go to jail. So, $100 million is full payout. I mean, whoever made the decision about the $100 million, if they ran their household like that, they'd be homeless. So you can't run a federal agency like that, number one. Number two, explain to me the Earth movement issue. Now, was that excluded by Congress, or was that, who excluded that Earth movement issue? Because, if Congress told you to exclude it, Commissioner Frugier or Mr. Kaiserman, that's one thing, but, who told you to exclude Earth movement?
So the Earth movement issue is both simple and complicated. So here's the simple part, George. The question is whether or not the flood caused the damage to the home, or the flood caused Earth to move in some way, and that caused damage to the home. Right. I see the way you're looking. That's how I looked when they explained it to me.
Right.
So here's the problem. It is part of the contract of insurance that policyholders got, and I'll tell you the number one problem we have. It's not Earth movement. Number one problem we have is that people are surprised at the time of their loss because they didn't know what was in their policy because we didn't tell them. So, and I say we, the agents, all the people.
I understand that, but one of the questions was Earth movement was excluded from our policy. Look, nobody reads our policy. Okay, who excluded Earth movement from being paid in the first place? Was it a congressional mandate, or was it a FEMA NFIP mandate because of the cost? And again, you're not doing it because you want to hurt people. At some point, people are going to pay high flood insurance, or we can't do this. I understand that.
FEMA NFIP.
These were decisions that were made. Just like basement exclusions,
right.
Earth movement exclusions. And this is, again, one of the things that when these decisions were made, we've never seen this number of cases. So it never was something that people thought was going to be difficult to figure out, because nobody ever seen this many number of, normally we're dealing with wind and water. So the usual fights were, was your wind insurance paying or not? So I don't think staff, when they decided that this was an area to rein in some costs without having to raise your premiums, would be that difficult. Sandy was actually the first time that we saw so many cases and began to realize, as Brad said, we'd sit in meetings and we look at our staff like in disbelief. Explain that to me again.
Right. I think the answer, George, is not congressionally mandated. In the process of putting together a national flood insurance program, the agency made determinations as to what exemptions and or other elements would be in a policy. And that is the subject of discussion now, especially 2 years. In 2 years, the National Flood Insurance Program is up for reauthorization, which means the law lapses, it ends, and it has to be renewed. That's why the work that we are doing here, as we think about what that's going to look like, is going to be incredibly important. But no congressional mandate, administratively.
So on the substantially damaged, right, we get to 51% with substantially damaged, and theoretically I have an assessment, it's $100,000, I got $30,000 up front, I fight, I get over the 51% threshold, but I took my $30,000, I already fixed my house. Now what do I do with that $20,000 or $30,000 that gets me over the threshold? I'm now substantially damaged. If I have a slab home, I have to raise it. I have to rip the whole thing apart. So the first 30 grand you gave me is gone. So how does that work with if we go over the substantially damaged threshold?
So you're asking if you're substantially damaged?
No, I'm not. Substantially damaged is over 51%, and it's probably, this question might actually be for you, Commissioner Fugate. Is I'm not substantially damaged today. I get more money from you. It puts me over the threshold. Now I'm substantially damaged. I don't have any money. I never went to the New York Rising program or the rent program to raise my home. I'm required now, if I'm substantially damaged, to raise my home. I'm actually being damaged by taking more money from you. I'm homeless, and so what do? If the money puts me over and I am now substantially damaged, am I required to raise my home?
So I would say that we have to take it on a case-by-case basis, but if you were required to raise your home, two things. One, you could get increased cost of compliance as long as it's within policy, that's $30,000. Okay, so that's not an option. For some people it is though, for some people it is. And then the other option is, again, you do have the CDBG grant programs that are still out.
Oh, no, all the time out. All the CDBG grant programs are done.
Yeah.
Like whoever's not on the boat is gone. There's only enough for about 15 to 20% of the people. And it's not your concern. You didn't give us that, and I appreciate that. But what I'm getting at, though, is just like the duplication of benefits, we're looking for an exemption, right?
So I think we need to talk about it because I'm not sure I
I
understand.
don't know if I can, this is one of the things George, you raised a point that I don't think I got an answer for you, because part of this goes back to substantially damaged, then kicks in your building codes to elevate.
Yes.
I don't know what the answer is. So I think this is, again, what I found is we need to find out what are going to be the hard to resolve issues, because I don't want to give a knee-jerk answer, and I don't think there's a simple way, but this is part of what we hope we can elevate. What are going to be the types of issues we're going to run into that we need to start getting answers to? Because quite honestly, the straightforward answer would be, well, you're going to have to comply with elevation, but you can't elevate, and so we end up in that do loop of we're not helping.
Well, right. So here's what I'm trying to get at is we want to get as many as 114,000 people that are rightfully owed their money. If we help with the substantial damage, people are gonna. The first question I get is, I'm on the threshold. I don't want me getting another 30 grand worth of work, and I got to raise it for another 150,000. I'm going to hold $120,000, so I don't want the money. So that's something that's got to be answered. And can you clarify the duplication of benefits? Is that going to be counted against my REM or New York Rising program money, or is it going to be deemed additional rent or something outside that? Because that's 40,000 people, 30,000 people in the grant program.
This is something we're going to need help with the senators, because these are other federal dollars I have no control over. All I can do is say, if you got individual assistance for, housing assistance or something else, and then you get more money from FEMA, we've already made the determination that those were extraordinary costs and were not duplication of benefits. So I can break and say, if you got individual assistance, an IA grant from FEMA, and we end up with more assistance from the IA program, I'm not going to treat that as a duplication of benefit because of the extraordinary cost and delays in getting it. I can make that. I did that.
And then we have to go to HUD and somebody else.
We're going to try to make that a little easier on everybody. So we have been working with HUD, New York Rising, Build It Back, and New Jersey REM, so that we're going to try to build this into our process so that it can be seamless for you.
Okay. Here's $1 million question.
I don't want to preempt Senator Booker. I know he yielded to you.
Last question. I promise.
Okay.
Last question. I have some Newark blood in me, so maybe he can just let me go. But this is my last question. What's a reasonable cost per square foot to rebuild a home in New Jersey? I think that is where we have to start. Coming down here in the bus, people are getting from $30 to $200 a square foot, and we all live in the same neighborhood. And I know their homes; they're beautiful homes, but they're not much better than the $30 a square foot home. So I think we have to work backwards from that number. And I'm just going to give you the number New York Rising has, which is a HUD program. It's a Stafford Act program. It's $160 per square foot.
Well, that's a difference.
Okay, and there's people out here. Do you get $30 a square foot for your home? $30 a square foot, and other people getting $100. I know people who've got $200 a square foot, and that's, I think, where you start.
I don't want
What are you going to put in a postcard? You know what you put in a postcard? If you did not receive $160 a square foot, call us. That should be in the postcard. I yield. So I just need a square foot number or what ballpark number you have, and I won't talk.
I think you and I will be running his next campaign. I thank the senator from New Jersey. Look, the big thing for me is that folks have been through this time and time again, and they're not coming out with real commitments on timeline. You know, we're hearing a lot of talk, but they're not hearing anything concrete. The one thing that I've got is that we're going to brief our staff next week on Sandy claims review. But my questions are a lot of the aspects of what we talked about, from fraud investigation, frankly, until folks can actually expect, as you see, the timeline going so that they can actually end up with the resources they need.
I don't have a good answer for you, Senator, I'll tell you what. But I'll make an offer at the table while we're sitting here. We need to get the process up and running. This is unprecedented. Yes, the good news is that it is unprecedented, right? Who'd want to go through this over and over again? This is unprecedented. So if I sit here and say to you, oh, I'm going to have money in the hands and it's not there, then we're back here again and I know what happens. So here's what I'll say. We will start beta testing the process once we brief your staffs next week. Let me make an offer. If there's anyone in this room who would like to be part of the beta test, Alexa, raise your hand, please. Alexa Norick is my senior policy advisor. See Alexa on the way out. Give her an email and a name. We will contact you, and we're working with Professor Rajat on also building a group for and Sue to build it. So I'm assuming no objections, right? We bring those folks in. If you want to be part of the beta test, because what they'll do is that'll help us figure out how long it takes to get on average from intake to check writing.
We need what George brought up. We need to find out how many are going to hit a 51% threshold. And we don't want to start this process and not know what that answer is. So if you're willing to be the beta or the guinea pig so we can find out what's going to work, what's not going to work. Because what we were going to do, Senator Booker, is brief your staff to say, what do you see? What else is missing? Or is this ready to go? Because we're basically wanting to go back to the 4 senators, go, here's what we're proposing. What do you see? Any concerns? Because then we want to go and start the process. But if you're willing to allow us to start that with folks to want to come in and help us test the system, because I don't know, and George brought up a point that I guarantee you, I don't have an answer for that. But until I see these things, I won't know what the answer is. And if we roll this out to 144,000 people and all of a sudden I can't do anything at 51%, then I really haven't changed anything.
And so that goes for the non-litigant review process.
This is the non-litigant process.
Yeah, the litigation is proceeding.
Now, my understanding, just to jump in with Senator Booker, you did say you're going to come brief us next week. What you're going to brief us about is the entire process that you intend to unfold.
That's correct, sir.
So that we can give you input if we think there's something missing in the process or something that is onerous in the process.
Yes, sir.
For your consideration
Yes,
for a final process to be developed. And then I heard you say earlier when you made your presentation that is your intention to start off in the tranches that you defined with the engineering firms and bad actors for engineering firms, of sending the first tranche of mail, and we would find other ways as well. You know, maybe question about, well, what do we do? Our offices, others, the nonprofits, and everybody else to make it very clear that you have an opportunity to come in and have your case reviewed. That's correct. And so you're looking at that, you said in May.
Yes, letters out in May.
So again, the idea that's been presented here by New Yorkers and folks from Jersey about partnering with some of the nonprofits to help better perfect how you're doing. Do you have plans to do that? Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, so Senator, we've been partnering with the nonprofits since we began this undertaking several weeks ago, or now a month and a half ago. A couple pieces to it. So one is, how do we help the nonprofits continue to do the work they've been doing? Because frankly, that is great work, and it gives us better packages coming in. The simple issue is they need funding. So there's a number of different ways that we're going to try to do that, but in the end, it'll control all the funding streams, and some of this involves grants, and some of this involves contracting, and it's all very unusual. So we're trying to do it quickly, and we're trying to get to the bottom of that. We've had some conversations on that in the last few weeks. The other way we can do this, and we're looking at, is to the extent that the nonprofits want to be inside the review process. There are some opportunities for that. Most of the nonprofits have indicated to us that their role as advocates would put them in conflict if they were inside the process, and so we're trying to support them from outside the process. And we have had some conversations about with nonprofits and other institutions about their role as neutrals.
And then the challenge of getting information to people. Obviously, we talked a little bit about the mailing process, but do you describe it more, because it seems like it would necessitate holding more public hearings on site throughout the state.
Senator, the mailings are to satisfy the requirement that we send it to the last known address. We're also going to go back to neighbors telling neighbors, social media, advertising. When you call us, we'll know who filed the claim. So I don't think, the concern is, well, if you spread this out too far, you have people coming in and trying to file false claim. We already know who filed the claim. So if you're not on that list, you didn't file a claim. So that means that we're going to do the direct mailings, because that way we have positively, we've sent something there. But we're not going to look at that as the only way to get the word out. But the positive control over who's going to have any assistance is you file the claim. That gives us the boundaries to say we're not going to open this up to a lot of fraud, because we have by name who filed the policy on what piece of property. This will be one of the pieces of paper. This is part of bureaucracy, that when you call and say, hey, that was my claim, we just need to be able to make sure it's you and not somebody, because I'm pretty sure when this gets out, people will try to game the system. Remember how they were doing your tax returns? So the other thing is, we got to protect people and make sure somebody isn't filing on your behalf, trying to get a deal and you don't get it. So we are going to have to make sure there's safeguards that the person that's coming in is actually the person that got the claim, and that we're not getting somebody coming in. But that being said, we know exactly who filed the claim, so we know what family policy, we know who was involved, and as long as we can demonstrate that's the person we're dealing with, then we're not limiting it to just direct mail, but that will be one of the formal processes to go out.
Go ahead, Senator Menendez.
No, look, it's extraordinary to have the director of FEMA for 2 hours. So I appreciate their willingness to be. I think it's a lot of insights for us to consider. I just want to summarize so that we can close this first session, and of course we'll do the last session. And a lot of insights. What I'd like our respective staffs who are taking notes to synthesize that for us, so that George's questions, for example, we can drive with FEMA as we meet with them next week. I think there were some good ones and others as well, but that we can take that. I'd also like to just make sure I run through this so I understand what clearly from my notes is agreed to, which is as it relates to what I'll call people who were vocal or had some other reason for denial, that we're going to open up all those cases. We're going to do it in a way that is as extensive as possible. You're going to do it in tranches to determine, first of all, first tranche engineering firms that were bad actors that you know about because of litigation. You're going to get the first wave of mail, as well as other follow-ups that we've just described here. Secondly, any engineering or firm review, second wave of mail. And then third, all other claims that haven't maxed out, that haven't hit the 250,000. So that's the universe who's going to be pursued. And you're going to brief our staff next week as to what the process you intend to lay out for people to be able to deal with. We're going to give you input from what we learned from constituents, as well as what we've heard from our non-governmental groups, that hopefully produces a process that is fair, transparent, efficient, simple as possible, and as quick as possible. Then after that, you're going to send out your first letter sometime this coming May to that first tranche that we talked about. You're going to engage the nonprofits to be part of this. And you're going to give them a single caseworker to deal with so that they're not getting bounced around, which is what we've heard so many times. People got bounced around so often, produced their documents so often. It was ridiculous. There'll be a neutral decision maker. If people don't like the result, maybe they'll like the result and say, okay, now I got a fair shake. But if they still think they didn't get a fair shake, there'll be a neutral entity that will make that call. And you'll look at that decision. If the decision goes above and beyond what FEMA decided, unless there are extenuating circumstances, it sounds like your default will be to go in line with what the neutral decision maker made. All right, those are the big elements of this. As it relates to the longer term questions, we're going to look at the Earth movement and what it means and quantify that in terms of cost, because I know colleagues are going to raise that question when we say, I think it should be fairness, and which goes to the fundamental question, Administrator, that you've raised, which is, we have a insurance policy, a flood insurance policy that is dealt more with the question of mitigating the fund versus dealing what is right by the policyholder and treating them fairly. And how do we change the dynamics of that? Does that include having a write your owns as still part of the system? Do we change that, which will need legislative change, I believe, to help you? Maybe not, I don't know. But if it does, we certainly want to look at that. And then, if to the extent that we have whatever policy, whether it's through a write your own or a governmentally issued policy, that then we look at some of these exemptions like earth movement and how we deal with it. And how do we have a claims process that is ultimately a lot fairer to the policyholder. The other point is you made in response to Senator Schumer that there's, as to the extent that you have the wherewithal in your universe, no clawback by FEMA as it relates to these funds that we have.
That's right, just to be clear on that, Senator, because I want to overstate it. Right. We're FEMA, we will not deem any of the funds paid out in these settlements or these reviews to be a duplication of any benefit that FEMA paid out under its individual assistance program. There's other dollars.
There are other dollars not in your control. That's correct. Finally, in fairness to the administrator on the question of when he has said we will need some paper, we have colleagues here, and I can tell you this from our fight for mitigating the flood insurance program, who I have a different view of what the flood insurance program should be. In terms of how we deal with people who live throughout our country in critical areas, and look at the flood insurance program as it can be all self-paying. If you want it to be self-paying, meaning that it funds itself without any governmental money whatsoever, then you have a consequence on the rates. And if you want it to be a system that is fairer to the policyholder who is paying in the first place, then you're going to have maybe some consequence as to how the fund derives its money. There will be people in the United States Congress who will drag the administrator before them, either on the committee of relevant jurisdiction, like I think you report to Homeland Security and others here, and banking and finance, which I sit on, and also appropriators who will say, wait a minute, how did you spend this money? So that is not to say don't be as streamlined, transparent, efficient, and as generous as possible within the context of people's legitimate claims. But by the same token, I want my fellow citizens to understand there is a process here that they will have to respond to, including an inspector general. When we say IG, that means the inspector general. It's sort of like the law enforcement entity of these different departments, who independently reviews what they did and what others did before them to determine whether or not there should be criminal actions taken against any entity. So I just want to create a fair balance here between what we want and expect, and recognizing that the system did not work, and recognizing that there is a movement to change that system, which I appreciate and applaud, and will continue to keep people's feet to the fire on. By the same token, I want to recognize that as we deal with the National Flood Insurance Program, as it's 2 years out from being reauthorized, we're going to have an honest public policy debate as to what that looks like and what that means for policyholders. Because I can tell you that the fight that we had to stop the rate shock was not a simple one. It ended up, working out, but it was not a simple one, and it costs money, and that has consequences. So that's all going to be part of what we're going to continue to work on to the task force and get people's insights and commitments to, so we can have a flood insurance program that is fair to the policyholder, that has the right purposes in mind, but that also can be funded in a way that we can talk about collectively as to how do we achieve its solvency at the end of the day. I think with that, if we're good, with the thanks yeah, absolutely.
Unless you're or Senator Booker have concerns, if you're willing to help us do the beta, it means it won't be perfect, and you're gonna probably run into some of the stuff, but we need you to tell us what's wrong. We won't be able to take everybody, but if you'll get with Brad's staff, okay, we'd like to start walking through and taking you and use you as test cases to see what. Because one of the things that Brad said about Let's Pay For Center is we are accepting some of these affidavits. If they'll put an affidavit, notarize it, attest to their losses, when there's no other paperwork available, we're saying that's justification. So we are trying to do that, but if you'll help us, because if we don't figure out all of the various things that are gonna stop this, and we announce it to 130,000 people, then it's just gonna fail. But if you're willing to start now, and then we'll present you the process next week, because we're presenting you something to implement next week, not something that we're thinking about. And we'll actually start seeing some of what we're gonna have to, I think, get fixed.
Now, the beta, you mean you need some data.
I need folks that have had this problem, that did not get the claim resolved, to work with us.
How big a universe?
How many you need?
This room here is good. It gives us,
Okay.
we'll start with this.
So I have a feeling you will, I'm good with that. You're good with that? We're good with that. I'm sure we can speak for our colleagues in New York. I think there'd be no problem with doing that, do you think? So, okay. And secondly is I have a feeling there's no problem in getting you as many data points as we have. So we will make sure that we have the appropriate sample size for you to figure out what's the most effective way.
Senator, thank you for helping us get policyholders out of the middle. Thank you for helping.
Well, and thanks everybody for your inputs today, and to the administrators, thank you for engaging in a very collaborative process, and we look forward to achieving some success for justice for Sandy. That's the task force is.